conquer, so love beware, no more despair in this love.
Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with jazz musician, vocalist, educator, and minister Leonisa Ardizzone. She opened up about her latest 2019 CD with her quartet called All in Good Time, and that sums things up. The CD hangs together like a densely emotive poem that was composed very carefully, full of truth. She was introduced to her music a decade ago. Her creative process had a smart edge to it, revealing a very fertile mind and an interest in the music. She went on to grad school and she started singing in the New York City scene. She took a break for some time. She's back now and she is stronger than ever. So please get to know her and dig this interview, my friends.
Thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz today. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much.
You bet. So let's talk about your latest 2019 CD with your quartet called All in Good Time. Give me an idea, take me into this album and what your vision for this project was.
It's 10 years in the making, right? So that's hence the title, The All in Good Time. But I had to pull back from making music for about a dozen or so years, and certainly from recording music for about 10 years. But these were all songs that the band and I had, not all, half of them were songs that we had played right before I sort of had to go underground for a little while. and then we started adding more tunes to it that I was either curious about or felt like helped me capture what I had been going through for those 10 years, and things that either I wanted to write or things that I wanted to make my own version of because they perfectly captured either feelings I was having or experiences that I was like, I don't want to write about that because this person does it so well. I'm going to take that one. And so we really tried to put together something that tells a story of my the last 10 or so years of my life, but more than just my life, but more like a sense of what I think matters, like an arc of a timeline, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it. Yeah.
So before we get to the other part of your life as a musician and a minister, I want to begin at the beginning of your life. Are you from New York?
I was born in New York, but then I was raised in New Jersey.
So talk to me about
moved back to New York.
Okay, cool. So talk to me about your childhood and how you got into music and kind of what that experience was like.
Yeah, so it was a pretty musical household. My father was an opera lover, opera singer, because, he was, as the story goes, he moved 18 times in 18 years. He was very poor, had a rough upbringing, but when he was about 10 years old, heard opera coming from the apartment in downstairs from him or something, and he just fell in love with it. And there's a story in there that I'll save for another time, but his love of opera guided him, and he couldn't become an opera singer, mostly because he just needed a trade, and that was the conditions of his life, but he never stopped loving it. And so then when my brother and I, and then eventually even my adopted brother came along, our house was always filled with music. So when I was very young, 2 doors down, our neighbor was a music teacher, a piano teacher, and I started playing piano with him from a very young age, was listening to opera, learning how to, sing along for songs when I was little. And I grew up in a town that, small working class town in New Jersey that really gave funding to their music program. It's sort of amazing. It's something that we, rarely see. As a person who's an educator, I barely see music programs sometimes. And our school system was really supportive of music. And so by the time I was in second or third grade, I had added the violin. We had choral music starting in kindergarten. So I was playing the violin since I was, 7 or 8 years old. And then that continued. And then by the time I was in middle and high school, the band directors were like, add another instrument, and I'll play, you're in the orchestra and the choir, why not join the band? And so I learned the oboe, and then I played the piccolo in the marching band. It was a rich school system, but then also 2 parents who just loved music and took us to see things and, had a house full of it, basically.
So what were the first jazz albums you listened to that really got you going?
So that's interesting. So I know when I was younger, my parents played things, and my favorite, and I still, when I listen to this album, and I know it doesn't, maybe some people will say, oh, that's kind of corny, but Chuck Mangione's Land of Make-Believe was like a life-changing experience for me. And I mostly, the vocalist on that, I'm blanking on her name right now, just blew me away. And the meaning of the song and how long the song went on and how danceable it was and how joyful it was. And that was a staple in our house for like cleaning. We would put on that and everyone would dance and we'd all sing along. And so that started it. But then it wasn't until I was probably in college where I rediscovered jazz. And I had a boyfriend who listened to a lot of Miles Davis. So I can't even think of which albums because we were just constantly listening to stuff. And then I got heavy back into the vocalists. And when, I listened to Ella and Sarah Vaughan and Billie Holiday, of course, that's sort of the gateway, right, for many of us singers. And so those were the early albums. And then from there, it was just like the floodgates. Like someone would recommend something and then it became this snowball effect. And I just started to dig in as much as I could.
So where did you start with your gigs? How did that begin for you? Was that and was that phase of your life when you started getting on stage, was it comfortable? Was it a second home to you?
Yeah, it's funny. So I was a gymnast when I was younger, so I really had a lot of experience of going out in front of people alone doing risky things. and then I became a dancer, and then I was always singing and in school performance. I really liked it, when you got picked to do a solo, and then I also played in a string quartet when I was in high school, and we would travel around to libraries around Bergen County. And so that performance aspect was really a comfort almost, right? It felt natural. But then what was funny is sometime in college, after not really singing or making music for a couple of years, I then auditioned for a friend's band, and I was terrified. Like it was the strangest thing. And and I said to him, I don't think I can do it. And I couldn't. And he found somebody else and moved on. And then like a couple years later, I don't know, maybe I think it was just timing. And then after that, I feel very comfortable and joyful, and I love performing. I love engaging with the audience. And I think the older I get, the more experienced I get, and the more I grow into this idea of music as my ministry, it really becomes something transformative when I'm performing. Like I just love that connection and the energy that comes from it.
So let's go into, you had a break from music. So your career took off, things were happening, you took a break. Now you're back with the city. Give me a little bit of a timeline here and kind of what happened.
So I released 2 albums, 2007, 2009, and then I went through a really painful divorce, but that was actually incredibly liberating. But as a result, I was a solo mom, and it just became a challenge to want to do certain things, and I was very practical and cared mostly about raising my wonderful child. That became the priority. And then I decided, because I had entered into this kind of new phase of life as this kind of newly rebirthed person, I decided to try and start my own business, which I did and had a great time, and it went under, but that's okay because it was a learning experience. And then ultimately, all these series of things that didn't work out, I like to call them failures when I preach, but I don't mean it in the dead end sense. I mean it as a new beginning sense. I felt called to ministry, and some of that came along because I was very active in my home congregation and part of a jazz Vespers series at my home congregation that I was curating. So music never left. It just started to take a different form because my priorities shifted. I was a mom first, and that was it, and then was trying to be creative in other ways, and it led to ministry, and it led to music unlocking all other things. Well, I guess hand in hand, the music and the ministry unlocked 2 different sides of me that needed each other. I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, personally, for me, I understand. I see that I have a part of my brain that gets involved with technology, and then I have a part of my brain that deals with art, and then everything else. So that's, I guess, my question for you as a minister. how does that feed into what you do as an artist, and how does being an artist feed into what you do with your spirituality?
Oh, that's great. So, well, there's, it's funny. It's like I often think of it as like a three-legged stool, right? So I'm a minister. I've long been a scientist and a science educator and a musician. And I realize that each of those legs feed me in a different way, and then they feed one another, right? So I will, I interact with children fairly regularly through either education work or ministry work. And, there's such an openness to when they're not being, downtrodden or something, right? Like in certain ways. But when kids get to be fully themselves and fully creative, it's a reminder of that creativity that like resides in all of us. And then, which, opens things up for me and creatively. But then I go, oh yeah, but that's the same thing that happens in ministry, right? And ministry in a verb sense, like I look at it very large as like all of us are these beings who are looking for connection and love and growth and transformation. And so music feeds that for me, and then it like re-inspires me, and it, fills my cup. So then I can practice ministry in a way of feeling fully engaged and connected with people and the world. And then, right, so it becomes this back and forth, almost like a dialogue. And of late, I'm very interested in how ministry can look different, right? Like I often joke, but I'm not joking at all when I say there's certain performances I've seen in my life where I felt more spiritually moved than I have ever in a church setting, right? So there's that power of music and art to connect us to one another or to something greater or to nature or to, whatever you call that, the ineffable. That's what drew me to ministry, and that's what keeps me coming back.
So talk to me a little bit about like one of your first live jazz shows that you saw that really inspired you.
First live jazz that really inspired me. Okay, well, it's funny because I was originally thinking opera is the thing that really started me getting inspired by music, thinking that way. But then that's hard to trace back because there are quite a few, because I generally have a hard time not crying at most performances. Is that hysterical to say? Like I get so moved. So I can think of one that really blew my mind and just, I was at the Litchfield Jazz Festival. My kid was crawling, so maybe she was a year old, so 15 odd years ago. And it was this, beautiful scene, already pretty inspirational because it's like day of jazz. And Brad Meldau gets up there. And I think it was a solo show of his at this particular one. I should look it up since my memory isn't what it used to be. And I just was sitting on a blanket with other friends, and I just looked and made sure someone was watching the baby, and I walked almost like in a trance up to as close to the stage as I could get because I just was so moved. And then he was playing all kinds of stuff, but then he broke into some of that Radiohead stuff that he did, and it just blew my mind that someone could do that with that, could take this idiom and translate it in such a way, and it was so profoundly powerful. And so that was an early one that, kind of blew my mind.
So why do you love jazz?
Why? Oh, I bet you asked everybody that question. Well, I love it because there's a beautiful, rich, deep history, right, that I admire and just admire and love. And it's coupled with this, zeal for pushing the creative envelope, for doing things differently every time, for taking risks, for collaborating, for communicating in ways that maybe not everybody can see or hear or understand. And it's, it's just, in some ways it becomes ineffable for me too, right? Like there's just so much, it's so complex and it's so sublime at the same time that I find it just profound. Like that's, yeah.
If you could get into a time machine and go back in time and see a show, anywhere, anytime, where are you going?
Oh, wow. Where am I going? Holy cow. That is a great question. Well, I feel like so much of the obvious answers are like just to wander like the West Village. Let's see, I'm 50, so 50s, 60s, even, yeah, like in the 50s and 60s, I guess, and what was happening there, or going over to Paris, and I can't think of one. Well, there's probably a lot of people I would have liked to have seen live. Like I would just have killed to see Coltrane live, or Charlie Parker, or other, so many of I guess the folks whose language I just love so much. To be able to have sat in front of them and felt their auras would have been pretty intense. So yeah, I think I would spend a year, and I would probably wind up in a different place each time and see where it took me. Is that an easy way out of that answer, or no?
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. No, I dig it. I dig it. So this is my final question. Everything's going to come down to this. Everyone has a version or an interpretation of who they think you are. Your family, your friends, your fans, but you know yourself as, who do you think you are?
Oh my goodness. Wow. Who do I think I am? I don't even know if I ever answered that question in seminary. This is very funny that you, well, when I really think about who I am a person who likes to bring people together. I've been spending years of my life finding kind of myself, or my no self, since I'm a Buddhist, but my true calling and understanding. And when I think about it, I really feel like I am a broker of joy. I feel like I'm a broker of inspiring curiosity and, deep digging, whatever the medium is, whether it's science or music or, theology, for lack of a better way to put it. So I like to think of myself as a person who inspires inquiry and brings joy.
That's a great answer, and I think that's a great way to wrap everything up. Hey, thank you for taking some time out to talk about the new album. Good luck with it, and talking about your life and music. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Leonisa for her time, her music, and the stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Let's start falling again.
Neon Jazz.